Welcome to season 2 of Tripping Over the Ottoman. I'm David Van Deusen, here with my co-host Abby.
And if you are a returning tripper, welcome back. We are so thrilled to have you joining us again. Season one was an absolute blast. David and I have got even more fun in store for you this season. We have more great episode breakdowns, maybe some guests, and of course, some giveaways. And if you're brand new to this podcast, well, welcome. We're so glad that you found us. David and I are two super fans from totally different generations, and we take a deep dive into episodes of the one thing that does unite us.
And that is the Dick Van Dyke Show. And today we're kicking off our new season with what is my all-time favorite episode, It May Look Like a Walnut. In fact, I love the episode so much that it was my inspiration to create and publish the Walnut Times, the Dick Van Dyke Show newsletter, which ran for 20 years from 1995 until 2015. You know, Carl's idea in my mind for this episode was just genius and his writing fantastic. And there are so many terrific scenes and memorable lines from this episode that fans quote. From my point of view, the episode is just pure enjoyment and gave the cast a vehicle to really just have fun. But I know, Abby, you have a little different take on this from the episode from when you first watched it, right?
As an adult, I really appreciate the episode now. I became a fan of the Twilight Zone and, Alfred Hitchcock, things like that. And it became more, my vibe. But when I was a kid, like I probably saw it when I want to say 5 or 6, and it scared the bejesus out of me. It's so did the Ghost of H. Chance. Those were the two episodes. Like if that one came on, like I'm going under the covers like Laura. Like I'm like, I'm out of here. So yeah, a little different. But now I really, really do appreciate it. And like you said, it's just genius and the writing's fantastic.
This episode, It May Look Like a Walnut, season 2 episode 20. In the whole chain of episodes, this actually is referred to as episode 51. Carl usually numbered them from 1 to X. So the 158 episodes, this is 51 of that. Written by Carl, as we said, originally written in June 1962 on June 12th, revised way the next January
Yeah,
11th of
interesting.
63,
Well, and I wonder if it was some of what we're going to talk about of why it was so long between those two.
filmed a few days later on January 15th, and then eventually aired on February 6th, 1963.
And this was directed by Mr. Jerry Paris. He basically cites this as his directorial debut. It wasn't the first episode he directed. There was a couple before that. Probably was the most pivotal of the few that he did. So he always cites that as his first directorial debut, and a great one at that.
For this, directed Ray Murdoch's X-Ray, and I Was a Teenage head writer.
Also great.
Jerry was starting to take over from John Rich, who had done the directing up to that point, along with a few others. John Rich told me one time that he was so disappointed that he did not stay long enough to direct this Walnut episode.
Really? Oh, that's interesting.
He always viewed it as the one episode that got away, if you will.
Oh,
And in John's book that he wrote, Warm Up the Snake, that's what he wrote as the inscription to me in the book was the walnut, the one that got away.
oh, how cool. And David has a million memories like this. I was just perusing his book, To Twilo and Beyond, My Walnut Adventures with the Dick Van Dyke Show cast. And there's a whole chapter devoted to David going to do interviews with Rosemary and Dick Van Dyke and Carl to do, what was it, a documentary about the making of
Yes,
It May Look Like a Walnut. And then those clips were used for the DVDs and the Blu-ray special features, were they not?
that's right. So I did a little 23-minute featurette, if you will, about the making of the Walnut episode, interviewed Dick and Carl and Rosemary. When they put out the DVDs and the Blu-rays of the episodes of the show, they asked if that could be included as bonus footage.
Very cool. David's book, lots of great stories. He puts you right there at the interviews and all that. It's really fun.
It's been quite a ride with the
I'm
Dick Van
sure.
Dyke Showcast, I'll say that. So the other intriguing part about It May Look Like a Walnut is it's the first episode to display the episode title on the screen.
I read that today and I never made that connection. I've never thought of that. Did you know this piece of information? I did not know that.
I did.
I was like, how have I not, connected this? And, like the season one, all the opening so different. And I never put it together that the title wasn't shown. So I was very, very cool.
I think in our heads, when we see Dick come in the front door and be greeted by Laura and Richie, and he comes down and Buddy and Sally are there, we almost always envision that title appears on the screen, but it didn't at
Yes.
the outset. It wasn't until this episode.
Very cool.
Usually at this point, we talk about different descriptions of the episode. I have some interesting ones, but what do you have, Abby?
I have a couple. Let's see. I'll do the one that I maybe think you don't have. A late show thriller gives Rob a nightmare in which he imagines the world being taken over by an alien who bears an uncanny resemblance to Danny Thomas.
Never heard that one before. I have Rob enjoys a scary televised sci-fi movie while Laura cowers in fear from it. But the next day, details of that movie where Earthlings are being taken over appear to be coming true.
That's great.
Do you have anything else? Because I have one other as well.
I have one other one. It's similar to
Go
that
ahead.
one. Rob enjoys a scary sci-fi movie on TV while Laura cowers under the bed cover so as not to see or hear it. When the show ends, Rob further tortures Laura by telling the tale of Kolak, a visitor from the planet Twilo who resembles Danny Thomas, and deploys walnuts to steal Earthlings' thumbs and imaginations. This was weird because they don't mention that it's like not real.
Right.
It's a very strange synopsis.
Well, the last one that I have is the actual TV guide description that was
Cool.
published the week that the episode aired for the very first time.
Oh, that's awesome.
And the way they describe it is one night, Rob sees a TV movie about a man from another planet who distributes poisonous walnuts on the earth. Next morning, Rob finds his living room floor strewn with walnuts.
That's great.
So a very interesting synopsis.
That's a great one because it sort of teases it, you know.
It does. And TV Guide generally would list the cast. So it said Dick Van Dyke, Rob Petrie, talked about Laura, talked about Buddy, talked about Sally. There was no mention of the guest star, who we'll talk about here in a minute, listed in the TV Guide credits.
Okay.
This episode does feature our main cast members, Rob and Laura, Buddy, Sally, Mel, Richie.
Mm-hmm.
Millie and Jerry don't appear in this, interestingly.
Well, maybe because Jerry was directing too might have made that harder sometimes.
Being early on, that's quite possible. But of course, fans know that the special guest star was played by Danny Thomas. If you review the cast page of Carl's script, Danny Thomas is not listed in the script. We'll talk a little bit more later about Danny's involvement with it and Carl getting Danny involved. But I think it's interesting, even the end credits that roll at the end of the episode don't list Danny as Kolak. It's just sort of an interesting take because usually every other speaking role would get that credit.
Yeah, especially someone that big, you know. Well, I guess that's a great kind of segue into talking about Carl, his idea of how he came up with the episode.
A lot of shows on television that I loved. One of them was The Twilight Zone. And I said, gee, how can we get a fantasy like that onto the Dick Van Dyke Show? Looking for new ideas was always very exciting. And I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And I didn't know how I was going to do it. And then I said, of course, a dream. He's watching some show at night, and when he falls asleep, he dreams himself into it. And that's the way it started. And then, I must say, it almost wrote itself, because I immediately named the planet Twilo, tipping my hat to Rod Serling.
Carl talks about the tip of the hat to Rod in the Twilight Zone, but he really also used the famous movie at the time, which was The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And here's Carl's take about how he sort of manipulated that thought to adapt it for walnuts.
It was a wonderful movie called The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and where a pod absorbed a person's identity and then they were dead. I just got the idea of a walnut. I said, oh, like a smaller version. I was only a half hour. We can't use a pod. That's an hour and a half version.
Everybody is excited for this very different episode. Carl's excited about the idea. The cast is excited about the idea. But guess what? Executive producer Sheldon Leonard doesn't like it.
The only thing that was a surprise is when it came around the table, Sheldon Leonard, our executive producer, said, I don't get it. And I said, are you crazy? And Sheldon said, it's your baby, go do it.
Sheldon Leonard said, I think it's terrible. And he walked out, which he'd never done before. And we said, well, what do you think? He said, well, it's funny, it looks funny, and let's do it,
I think Sheldon thought it was just a little bit too wild. And it's funny how great it came out.
I believe I read that he pronounced it unsalvageable after a first table read, which is so interesting.
Very interesting.
Apparently, he thought it was too bizarre, wasn't going to be funny, was sure was not going to land. So, begins. We have the first scene, which is Rob and Laura's bedroom. They're watching a scary movie. Well, rather, Rob's watching a scary movie. Laura's scared, and she's hiding under the covers and, yelling things here and there. Is the music still on? Is the movie still going? We get our first glimpse of walnuts because Rob has a bowl of them behind his head, and he's reaching behind as he watches and, popping them in his mouth. So we get the very first moment of that. There's a creepy music that's playing, and all we get is Rob's reaction because we can't see what's on the television. His reactions are so great. I mean, you get the full whatever he's watching just by watching his face.
And here's a little reveal about what was on that television.
There's nothing there, just acting.
No, they were just looking at a blank screen. Maybe it had some halations on it, lights going on to simulate a television program being broadcast. But no, they were just looking at something that scared her and intrigued him. I was there doing the voiceover, so they could at least react to what I was saying. But no, they didn't see anything. Like all good actors, it looked like they saw something.
The more it goes on, the scarier Laura gets, and Rob is just entrenched in this sort of biting his nails and, pulling the covers.
I mean, he is enthralled.
Laura says, Rob, I can still hear the music even though I've gone under the covers. So, of course, he goes across the bedroom with a pillow, right? And starts holding it on her head so she can't hear. And you see the fighting from under the covers.
It's so funny. Yeah, the way she's kicking back to it, like to get him to stop suffocating her, basically. And the movie ends and, Rob lets the pillow up and she says something, like you nearly suffocated me kind of thing.
And the one audio exchange that I think is a little foreshadowing, right, is the movie ends and Rob says it's all over, and Laura says, "Well, not quite. I'm still breathing.
I'm still breathing."
And he said, "I was just trying to block out the music." She said, "Well, yes, but it blocked out my oxygen." So again, sort of sets the tone for what might be coming and talking about oxygen.
Did not make that connection. That's a very cool foreshadowing.
Yes,
very neat. Then the next part of the scene is basically Rob kind of torturing Laura. He's trying to tease her to scare her some more because she's so afraid already. And one thing I want to point out is the double beds, while kind of odd, it makes for this great blocking because in this whole next scene, he's jumping around the beds and between them, and like it makes it so much funnier, that there's the two there. So I think that's very cool. We got the walnuts behind him. We got her breathing, needing to breathe oxygen. There's lots of little bits here. And here is when we start to learn all the specifics of this Twilo world that is going to be the crux of the entire rest of the episode. It's Rob explaining to Laura about the movie, what they just saw, and all of the specifics. So we get to learn about Kolak, Planet Twilo, losing your thumbs, the Absorbitron, losing your sense of humor, drinking the water. We learn all this stuff. And even we learn about Danny Thomas, which is fun.
And Rob says, did you see the part where they cracked open that walnut and there was no nut in there? I think that's when she says, no, that's when I went under or something.
That's when I went under.
The original line of the script said there was something about the size of a Concord grape. But for some reason, the final line, we lost Concord.
It was just grape.
Size of a grape. Yeah.
Huh.
Don't know why.
Odd.
Yeah, maybe they decided to not take it out, or Dick didn't say it and they just kept going. Who knows?
Rob is infatuated with this movie. He's telling her it was done beautifully, like you should have seen it, kind of thing. And so he's you get this great excitement from him the whole time.
And he goes on to talk about the grape to tell her, yes, it was the particle of Absorbitron from the planet Twilo. And he begins to describe Kolak.
Well, and he does that great glowing sound, that weird sound he does. I can't do it, but yeah.
He can still do it today. He did it for me not too long ago.
He does that so well. One time I was watching Jim Carrey in something, and he did that exact noise and motion. And then I read later that he was a huge Dick Van Dyke fan. And I'm like, I wonder if he picked that up from him, because he does it all the time. Yes. It's funny.
Discussion continues. Rob tells about people from Twilight having four eyes, and he demonstrates the eyes and scares Laura some more.
Well, and the best though is sometimes she's curious, right? Like sometimes she's like, "No, don't tell me," and then a minute later she's like, "Well, tell me what it looked like." She'll sort of like backtrack. I love that.
So he introduced enough intrigue, and she was under the covers enough that she needs to have him explain it.
And Rob gets to do his great monster voice too, his like Bela Lugosi kind of, Boris Karloff, whatever it was. Well, without my thumbs, I couldn't type, or whatever he says,
Briefing Laura that Kolak went around to all the supermarkets to plant activated walnuts in the bins at the supermarket.
Such a crazy plot.
And if people get exposed to the absorbitron-laden walnuts, they take on the characteristics of Kolak. They get the extra set of eyes, and they lose their imagination and their thumbs. Reiner's genius here.
The two things I knew that set apart man from the monkeys or any other animal is his sense of humor. No other animals have senses of humor, and the opposing thumb. And I said, I'll give the alien those two things. And I knew Dick could do that. As soon as he saw he had no thumbs, he loved it. I mean, he walked around without thumbs. And then it was wonderful for a comedy writer to lose his sense of humor. And I realized I was home free.
And it's such a nod to those old 50s and 60s monster movies, It's such a great nod to those, just with even the title, aren't those old movies some are called like It Conquered the World, or it came at night, or whatever. They're always sort of those names. And so he's really with this great plot and the walnuts and the absorbitron. It's just such a great nod to those old monster movies, I think.
You talked about Rob and sort of his monster voice or whatever, but I liked his line, "Without my thumbs, I couldn't type. Without my imagination, I'd lose my sense of humor." These are classic lines. If a person's a fan of the show, they know exactly what you're talking about. Anyone not familiar with the show maybe thinks you have lost your mind, but the lines are so memorable, and the way they're delivered, I think, is why you remember them.
It's such a great mashup of good, excellent writing and excellent acting. It's the perfect pair.
Rob goes on to lay more foundation. Twiloites only eat walnuts, and they don't breathe air. They breathe water.
First, he pretends like he's done scaring her. Okay, we'll go to sleep, no problem. And then sort of like a couple beats happens. Then the light goes back on. Like, I forgot to tell you something,
And the scene is great where they think they're done and they settle in bed, and Laura reaches for the alarm clock and she puts it back down. And Rob says, "Well, wait a minute, you just set that for an hour from now." And she said, "You're right, because it's going to go off and I can wake back up.
Kolak is going to get me in my dreams." Yeah.
And she ends up telling him, "Well, you blew it. Now you blew it. You're not going to get waffles for breakfast." "Waffles? What are waffles?" he says.
So he's just terrorizing her, It's just terrible.
And the scene sort of ends with some foreshadowing. All you're going to get from now on is walnuts.
This show, I assume this isn't a spoiler, but it's going to be Rob's nightmare. And there's two kinds of dream sequence kind of episodes. So there's one where we get it indicates to us that it's a dream immediately. There's a sort of wavy, picture. There's, like glissando of the harp kind of, kind of thing. And that it's a dream. And then you have this other type, which is really fun because you don't know right away. So we're on the same ride as Rob as he's trying to figure this out. We're like kind of thinking it's a dream, but we're like, well, we didn't see the wavy lines. What's going on? So it's a really fun technique to do where we're kind of following him as he's figuring it out as well.
Agreed. The scene rolls to morning. Laura has apparently survived as Rob comes out of the bedroom and heads toward the kitchen to get his breakfast. And underneath his feet, he hears all this crunching. And what is that? And of course, he looks down and sees walnuts and sort of chuckles to himself like, "Oh, she's getting back at me." Right? That's the way
I had that coming.
That's the way I interpret it. Then into the kitchen he goes and he says, "Well, guess what I found in the living room?" To which she says, "A dead horse." And she just looks at him and he looks back at her.
And there's something about how quick could she get the walnuts on the floor? That seems weird. And then you're like, man, that's a joke. She's not usually that aggressive the way she says dead horse. It's very like a matter of fact. So you kind of get in the hint like something's weird. Something's off. Something's off.
So she turns and fills a glass with some water. And Rob says, "Oh, are you getting your morning breath of fresh air?"
Naturally.
He begins to sort of get into it with her and like, "Well, you put the walnuts in the living room. Okay. Why did you put them in there?" And she suggests that maybe Kolak or one of his friends from the planet Twilo did it. At which point Richie comes running in, and I love Larry's part in this. And Rob says, "Hey, Rich, how are you?" "Oh, good. Did you have your breakfast?" "Oh, yes. I had a nice bowl of hot walnuts."
He's delivering.
Laura gives him his brown bag lunch for school, and he gives it a good old shake, and you hear it, and he's like, "Yay, a bag of walnuts."
Well, and then this is the start of this other great technique, which is that if any mundane object, if seen everywhere and seen a bunch of times and in places it shouldn't be, it's creepy,
Yes.
right? So like a walnut in itself, not creepy, but it's like now that it's suddenly like permeating his entire existence, it's becoming very creepy immediately.
And Carl, in his discussion of this episode with me at one point, talked about the fact that it was just how do we use a walnut somewhere else? And also take the cliches of the day and twist them to fit it into the walnut scenario. Richie runs out and Laura says to, "Rob, what do you want for breakfast? Eggs? And how many?" And she flips open the egg carton, and like you said, it's full of walnuts. Kind of says, "Oh, they're rather small today," and sort of does a little look at him.
And I'm wondering, did they have to have those like shells? Because she grabs it by the shell and pulls it in two. I'm like, they must have had to crack those beforehand in a very specific way so she can open it up.
She cracks them on the bowl, right? And throws them in.
Yeah, and they just pop open.
They're back and forth about scrambled and how are you going to make them? And
he's trying to kind of make up with her, like, you got me. I know I was a pain last night, and she's kind of not taking to it. She's continuing on with the walnut stuff, and he's just thinking like, this isn't like her. You can tell, like, okay, fine. He can't believe she's taking this joke that far, is the vibe that you get.
And he gets so agitated, he's like, "You know what, never mind, I'll just get breakfast down to the office." And then she sort of appears to soften. "Oh no, I don't want you to go. Take one of these." And she takes the walnut, sticks it in the pocket of his coat jacket, which again we'll see again later as the episode evolves.
So now we're on to the next scene, which is the office scene. Rob enters the writing room. Buddy and Sally are already in the office, and they have a little, banter back and forth about why Rob was kind of late. They said, "Well, why are you late?" He said, "I got a house full of walnuts." And there's this bit where they both say, "A house full of walnuts."
If we could just go back just for a second, his initial entrance, I love, again, the writing, which is bang, bang, bang. Rob comes in and says, "I'm sorry I'm late." Buddy says, "I'm sorry I'm short." Sally says, "I'm sorry I'm single." So it's like boom, boom, boom. Got 3 lines and fit each of them perfectly. But what kept you is the next question, and the house full of walnuts.
Now, I noticed a couple weird things in the office. Tell me if you've noticed these, David. On top of the filing cabinet, there is a plastic putting green and like a putter laying up there, which I'd never seen before, and they don't use in any episode as far as I know. It must just be decor, but it gave the impression that somebody's putting, in the office.
Never noticed it, but I will go back now and look at that for sure.
I also noticed there's a TV on that side table, and the TV, it goes in and out, right? Like sometimes it's in the episode, sometimes it isn't.
Depending on what the storyline takes. Sometimes the TV either disappears or moves, gets replaced by a record player if you're going to be the singing weather girl and you're auditioning for the Alan Brady show.
Yes, exactly.
So Rob begins to explain to Buddy and Sally how he was watching this movie last night and talking about Kolak. And Sally says, "Oh, he's the guy that has 4 eyes that they threw out of the UN." And Rob says, "Oh, did you see that picture?" And she said, "No. Did they make a picture out of that?"
They make a picture out of that?
I was at the UN the day it happened.
So you're getting this like mix of, wait, what's going on here? Like, is she joking? Because Sally's a big joker. Is she joking about this? Or is she really see him at the UN? So Rob's, again, every scene is just an increase of confusion for him, where he's getting more and more convinced that something is off.
So Sally says, "If he didn't have those 4 eyes, I'd have married him." Again, some changes in the script, or I would say missing script lines, which we have a little treat for you fans, is that we're going to tell you what sort of these lines were. But during one of my visits with Rosemarie at her home, I asked her to record these lines that didn't make it to the final episode.
You're a genius. Like, to think of her to do that, like, that's awesome.
And she said, "What do you want those for?" And I said, "You never know, Rosemarie." So here it is, I don't know how many years later. She says, "If he didn't have those 4 eyes, I'd have married him." And Buddy says, "What's 4 eyes got to do with it?" And Rosemarie says,
Oh, buddy, you know my mother is against interplanetary marriages.
So Buddy says, well, what does this all have to do with walnuts? And he starts cracking them. And the camera cuts to Rob and Sally.
Honestly, my favorite line of the whole episode right here. He's cracking some walnuts over there, but we don't notice right away, what he's doing. And Sally and Rob are talking about Laura's situation, the whole at-home situation, and they hear the sound, this cracking sound. They look around and say, what did that? Do you hear that sound? Yeah, it sounded like walnuts cracking. And he says, oh, well, where'd that come from? And Buddy just goes, well, it might have come from me. I just cracked a couple.
Rob says, who put you up to eating walnuts? Buddy says, well, if you must know, I switched from pistachios. And then even better, Rob says, did Laura call you and tell you to eat walnuts?
Well, we get that note of realism now where when they respond to him, sometimes it's very like he's back in the real world, for a minute. So it's just enough to keep him guessing, So here they're going to say something it's very, well, of course not, Rob. What are you crazy kind of thing? So it kind of keeps him in that guessing phase all the time. So
Rob says, did Laura call you to tell you to eat walnuts? And they sort of look at him.
Sally says, wouldn't you look at a friend if another friend asked you if his wife called you and told him to eat walnuts? She delivers those play on words so well. She's amazing.
I'm looking at typed notes here and we're reading it. And it's not easy to say, even when you're reading it. So the fact that it rolled so fluently off of her tongue was pretty impressive.
She's amazing at that.
Rob's now starting to mutter to himself, is Laura really playing such an elaborate practical joke on me? And as he's going through this, Sally says, can we please get to work because I have a very important luncheon engagement. Here's some missing lines that didn't make it. Mm-hmm. And Rob says to her, well, what are you going to have for lunch? A walnut sandwich? And Sally says,
no, too fattening. I'll just have some clear walnut broth.
It doesn't work entirely, the line. It's okay.
Rob redirects and suggests that they get to work. But as he turns to the typewriter and starts to type, he discovers there's a walnut in the typewriter.
It's only increasing every moment. There's just more and more walnuts.
Who put that in there? Sally looks at him. Kolak. Maybe Kolak did.
Rob suggests maybe we do a boy-girl number. Buddy's great line. Well, I don't know if the world's ready for a boy-girl number sung by Alan Brady and Danny Thomas.
In the beginning, we talked about the music.
Yes.
At this point in the office, it's been sort of normal. Up to this point, nothing in the background, just the banter of the three of them. But Buddy's line, like you said, I'm not sure the world is ready for a boy-girl number sung by Alan Brady and Danny Thomas.
Just getting a little bit of creepy. Yeah, where something off here? Yeah.
We can sense that things are starting to really take a little bit of a turn here.
Now, is that Earl's music here?
It is Earl's music. Yes.
Fantastic.
Both in the beginning and the later scene comes up where Rob's alone in the office and we eventually meet Kolak.
It's very effective.
Carl also shared a few thoughts about Hagen's music and how it enhances the episode.
The composer, in this case Earl Hagen, looks at the film and realizes where he can either support an attitude or suggest an attitude, but you never go past what the actor is doing. If the actor is looking frightened, don't do it more frightened. What a good musician composer does is lift the scene, but it watches the scene and times it so that he doesn't bump into their words, and it's all done after. So, and bad music cues, you'll see them in movies every once in a while where the music is drowning out the dialogue. Maybe they mean to, but in our case, we always made sure that the dialogue would come through them. And the composer, Earl Hagen, was very careful of that.
Rob says, well, Danny Thomas is the guest star? And Buddy says, well, you told us about it kind of thing. And he can't figure out why he can't remember why he didn't know Danny Thomas was a guest star. And Sally says, yeah, you told us. You even put a reminder in the drawer. So he opens the drawer. And again, here we have a drawer full of walnuts. They're only increasing in number, David. It's becoming crazy. And in the middle of those walnuts, a headshot of Danny Thomas.
Which was actually Danny Thomas's headshot of that era, being on the Danny Thomas show. And in my archives, I have a copy of that photo, which is kind of fun to have.
Now, tell listeners who aren't familiar Danny's role on the Dick Van Dyke Show, just in general, before he's an actor.
Danny was one of the founding partners of the show. So the show, of course, is produced by Calvada Productions. And we may have talked before that Calvada was an amalgam of the initials of the four owners, CA for Carl, L for Sheldon Leonard, DA for Danny Thomas, and VA for Van Dyke. When they needed to have somebody play Kolak, Carl thought, it's very important that I get somebody who would be well known. And he landed on Danny Thomas.
The man from Twilo looked like Danny Thomas. I just wanted to give people an image as I wrote it. And then I called Danny Thomas while I was writing it. Hey, listen, I got this crazy thing. Would you play the man from Twilo? He said, oh, he would love to. So he played him very well, I must say. I couldn't have gotten a better piece of casting. That was very important that we have a star to do it. And it's not easy to talk a star into doing something like that. He, being a partner, was very happy to help the show become good.
So at this point, Rob is now getting pretty upset and unnerved and says that he's not going to work unless they promise to stop fooling around and trying to scare him. And this is where the real turn takes its place. Buddy and Sally sort of turn together in unison and in a very monotone voice say, "We'll stop fooling around and trying to scare you."
I'm trying to scare you. And just like, whoa, what is happening, And then Rob says something about, well, the funny thing is, and Buddy interrupts, oh, yeah, I know a funny thing. A nearsighted turtle falling in love with an army helmet. Ha! But he says it, and of course, the classic Maury Amsterdam joke, but it's just flat and there's nothing to it. He's acting very strange.
But he and Sally then start to laugh very ghoulishly or fiendishly. I think it's at this point that Hagen's music sets the tone all of a sudden, right?
I have that note too, that it kicks in right there. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And now we as fans say, oh, they've really got him now. Is this a nightmare? What's going on? And Rob says, the joke is over. Buddy sort of looks at him with this funny look on his face and says, Rob, if I didn't know you better, I think you lost your sense of humor.
And then Sally goes, maybe he swallowed some absorbitron. Now they're deep in the Kolak world now. There's no holding back now. They're deep in whatever that is. Rob's had enough.
And he's just spinning. Open comes the door and in comes Mel. And Rob's like, oh, all right. Wait.
His life raft, Mel. Yeah, that's what he thinks.
Rob dashes across the room and says, Mel, I want to ask you a question. Who's the guest star this week? And asks, Mel says, well, Danny Thomas. And he sort of looks at Buddy and Sally to make sure that they're not going to jump in and prompt Mel to give the answer, Danny Thomas. Rob says, well, did Laura ask you to invite Danny Thomas? To which Mel says, oh, no, she wanted Kolak.
The music is intensifying. And, now and then we get that great, like you said before, how they, taking the idioms of the day and things like that and changing them into walnuts. We get this great moment where Mel says, does he say, do you have a headache?
You're not looking too well or something.
And he says, here, take 2 of these, pulls out 2 walnuts and a glass of air.
Just prior to this, too, though, when Mel says Laura wanted Kolak, another missing line, which is sort of fun, is Buddy had a line that says, we all wanted Kolak, but here on Earth, we don't think he's a big enough name. To which Sally says, not yet, not yet. Kolak is becoming more prominent in the world. Apparently, he has more supermarket bins get filled with absorbitron-laden walnuts.
Rob's losing it now. Mel, no one's on his side. He's really starting to get scared too. I feel like as a viewer at this point, I always feel a little bad for him because it's hard to watch somebody going crazy on their own, when they don't know what's happening. It's hard to watch someone going through that. So he says, I thought you guys were my friends. But the final straw comes when we know we were confused if something was off, if it was a dream, something's off. We know now because Buddy and Mel have this exchange where they're best buddies. Buddy, how about we go work on that opening monologue together? Of course, pal. And then they kind of arm in arm and they exit. And it's of all the crazy things that's going on, there's walnuts in the drawer, there's walnuts in the house. This is the thing that sells Rob and us as viewers oh, okay, well, something's really wrong now because Buddy and Mel are talking.
And we have one more line of Sally's that didn't make it. So Mel says, join me, we'll work on the monologue. And Buddy, of course, pal. Sally says, hey, what about me? And Mel turns and says, what about you? To which Sally replies,
there he is. Another California landmark, Mount Baldy.
So following Sally's line, Mel responds with a yek and Buddy with a Sally, please. And then they all exit together arm in arm. And Rob is stunned. And then Sally offers her very classic line, which is,
don't forget, Rob. Thumbs up.
The music just adds to the intensity here. Hagen's music is just great.
it really goes even farther in the next scene where now we're alone with Rob in the office. And this is very similar to the Uni Oofs episode where he's alone in the office, sort of like, devolving into his own paranoia, and he keeps hearing the water cooler bubbling and things like that. So this is a very similar vibe where he's at the desk, he's at the typewriter, he's going to get some work done, but there's just too much eerie stuff going on for him to be able to do any work. So again, the music here really doing a good job of making it very creepy. Almost like Rob's almost responding to the music at one point, which is kind of interesting. Like almost like he can hear it, like, oh, that's enough now. You don't need it anymore. So then you kind of get like, okay, this is looking more and more like a dream because he's interacting somehow with this music.
That at the same time, he decides it can't really be happening because he still has his thumbs.
He's trying to reason and rationalize here. Like, is this, it's either a joke or it's a nightmare or it's really happening to me. He's kind of going through the list. And as he's trying to, rationalize if he's in a dream or not, he feels around on his suit and he feels that there's something in his pocket. And he takes it out of his suit pocket and it's a walnut that's somehow gotten there.
And it's the walnut that Laura gave him on his way out for breakfast.
Weird music starts to play. There's something specific about this walnut that's going to happen. And he opens it up. And David, can you tell us what was in there to make that absorbitron? It looks so cool.
It is cool. Like it's all sparkly.
Prop master made something that looks like it might be absorbitron. It absorbs your personality.
Rob's been exposed to the absorbitron now, I guess, we gather. And now he's trying to figure out, okay, he's got to be in a dream. He's not sure. He starts slapping himself kind of thing and, trying to see if he can wake himself up. So in that panic, he calls Laura at home and tells her, honey, go into my room, pull the covers down and wake me up. She thinks he's in his bed. And she has one of the classic lines, which is, darling, I don't have time for this. I have a walnut roast in the oven. She's still pushing the walnuts.
Another missing line didn't make it to the final cut. Rob says, the walnut you fixed for me is perfect. Laura says, which one? The one with the absorbitron? I can't stay on the phone any longer. I've got to go to the market. Rob says, you're not going to go buy any more walnuts. Laura says, no, I'm going to drop some off.
That's a great line.
So that would have been kind of fun, right? Intriguing why these particular thoughts and lines didn't make it. Of course, we don't miss them, but it's sort of fun to know some of the dialogue that could have been.
It's almost as if they were going to really hone in on the supermarket thing, but then realized they weren't going to show it in the episode. So it kind of was better to leave it. I feel like that's kind of what they're going for here, maybe. Rob has a moment here where he's terrified. He's pretty terrified. He says, okay, you and your friends have scared the pants off of me, which I thought was a great line. She doesn't give, though. She's still kind of being evil and kind of scary. And she says, tell me this, darling, do you still have your thumbs? Very, very kind of evil, like.
Rob says, can't do much about that or something. And she goes,
I think she says, we'll see, and then hangs up on him. So now he decides he's just dreaming. He's going to do some work. He's going to wake up from it and all will be well. So he starts typing and then we get the music kind of turning up and something big's going to happen. We can tell from this big swell of the music and the office door opens. Somebody's cane pushes the door open, which I just think is the most amazing entrance ever. The music swells and in walks Danny Thomas with a 3-piece suit and a hat and a cane. And it's an enormous laugh from the audience. They're just roaring. I mean, and what a treat, too, by the way, to go to this episode taping and then you get a glimpse at Danny Thomas, which I'm sure they didn't know was going to be in it, which is very cool. And then he says in what was alluded to in the beginning of the episode, which is that Kolak has this English accent, and so which I think is great. So he says something, could you tell me where I might find Robert Petrie? It's this like very, very big accent. It's crazy. It's actually Danny Thomas. It doesn't just look like Danny Thomas. This is Danny Thomas.
But with an English accent and a derby.
Yeah, yes. So great. So bizarre. One of my favorite lines in a lot of people's in the episode, which is, who are you?
And Danny says, who do you think I am?
And Rob says, Danny Thomas?
Again, a classic line and sort of this look of disdain on his face. What is it, Danny Thomas? Rob, all of a sudden, it hits him. He says, and he sort of points, up to outer space, and he makes that sound again, the music.
And the gesture, like his eyes are in the back of his head or whatever, yeah.
And Thomas just nods his head like, yes.
It's genuinely kind of creepy here. I mean, he's definitely scary. And he says, well, what are you doing here? And he says he's there to tell him that he's the last remaining Earth person. So he's the last one to not be, affected by this absorbatron. Rob tells him to leave. He's still got his thumbs, and you're not going to get me, Kolak, because look, I'm still doing good.
So Kolak turns around and pauses, and stops, and he says, "Look." And Rob's like, "Well, look at what? Your back is to me. You've got a stain on your necktie."
He says, "How did you see that?"
The classic line, "I have perfect 20/20/20/20 vision." Now, interestingly, that line was not typed in the script. It was a last minute handwritten in line.
Isn't that funny? And it's literally one of the best lines in the whole episode. Somebody had good instincts there at the last minute,
Wouldn't you love to know how that line came to be?
Carl actually has a story about how he came up with this sort of having the two eyes in the back and two eyes in the front.
I had to make the alien from Twilo a little different. Our hero had no thumbs, no sense of humor. And what else? I said, well, we are built wrong. In other words, on another planet, so we had put two eyes in the front, two eyes in the back. You never had to see the two eyes in the back because it would have taken a lot of work today. In motion pictures, we would have shaved the head and put eyes in the back. As Kulak leaves, he says, "You got a stain on your tie," with his back to, he's looking with his other set of eyes, 20/20, 20/20, 20/20.
So in the original script, at this point, Rob actually was supposed to approach Kolak and brush the back of Danny Thomas's head. And Kolak was going to say, "Don't touch my eyes, you stupid Earth person." But again, that didn't come. We'll hear that later when we meet up with Lolak. But at that point, Danny Thomas slowly starts to exit. And again, it really is a nightmare or a science fiction episode, because he starts singing the music to "Oh Danny Boy," which was his theme on his television show, right? Just as he leaves, he sort of throws this few walnuts that bounce around onto the desk and where else.
Perfect. It's fantastic. What an entrance and what an exit. Just so great.
And at this point, Reiner is able to introduce into the script the tip of the hat back to Rod Serling, and Rob says, "I must be in the Twilo zone." And of course, we all thinking Twilight Zone, but Twilo zone. Rob, originally talks to himself saying that that person was there, couldn't have been Kolak, that it was just Danny Thomas, because he recognized him as Danny Thomas. He recognized his theme song, and he recognized his nose.
Rob's alone again. Yeah, he makes the Twilo zone joke. We get in the first taste that he might be becoming a Twiloite. So he goes to light a cigarette, and in only the perfect way Dick Van Dyke can do, which is he's hiding his thumbs, he goes to light the cigarette and he can't because his thumb is gone, and he's doing this great sort of like hand, mime of it. It's so fun. He's so good at that physical kind of stuff. I'm so glad they picked something like that for him to do that would sort of like, register that like something was happening, because he's so good with that kind of thing.
Oh yeah. And literally he just is so panicked that he just runs out yelling that he's got to get back home so that Laura can wake him up and end the nightmare.
So then we end up at home, and Rob's just frantically running through the house, looking for Laura. The music's escalating. We sense there's some kind of climactic part approaching here,
And he takes off his hat, and out of the hat falls a few more walnuts, right? Another great line.
Danny Thomas put walnuts in my hat.
At which point he turns around and gets ready to put his hat away to open the closet door. And this, of course, is the climax and the highlight of the episode that everyone remembers.
And maybe a highlight of the series, honestly. I mean, it really is.
Let's hear Carl and Dick reminisce about how this came to be.
But the scene that comes to mind is Mary coming down out of the closet on that pile of walnut. It weighed close to a half a ton, I think.
Really?
They had to bolster up that closet because it would have just fallen apart. They had big, iron braces against it and everything. And I think it took about 6 of those great big bags of them. As I turned it, somebody pulled the deadbolt, because it would just blow the door clear off of there. There was no top in the closet, of course. She was on a ladder, and then as the time approached, she just climbed on top. But that was a funny looking thing. I had no idea it was going to work as well as it did. She just slid right out into the room. It was perfect.
We talked about how to get a closet full of walnuts, and I must say that our Glenn Ross, who was the special effects on that particular sequence, got the idea of building a chute and filling it from the top, and then Mary went up on a ladder and lay down on top of the walnuts. The door was jammed because the walnuts were right up against it, and Dick was having trouble opening the door. But of course, Dick will never stop a scene and say, whoops, it can't work. He knew that we had one shot at this, and you would never know that he was having trouble opening the door. He just forced it open, and out comes Mary. I mean, that got one of the biggest roars in the audience, from the audience that we had present, that we'd ever heard before. We didn't know how she would land. We didn't know she would hurt herself. They just filled a chute up, and she had it on top, and she came sliding out. And we didn't know how it was going to work, because we couldn't try it more than once. You do 1,800 pounds of walnuts, and you have to sweep them back in before the show begins. So we did it one time, and it worked.
I mean, it's an amazing sight gag. It's so fantastic, just every bit of it. Even the reverse shot we have kind of an interesting shot where we see Rob on the ground, like looking up at Laura. It just works so well. All of
yes,
it.
Which would have been shot after the episode was fully filmed. It would have been a pickup shot. But interestingly, when we have that shot of Rob, you can see his thumbs in that shot.
Oh, interesting.
No one had the presence to say, oh, Dick, we saw your thumb. You got to hide your thumbs.
Yeah. They probably forgot if it was like a pickup, kind of later on. Maybe it didn't even occur to them.
The audience reaction to this was just incredible.
I mean, can you imagine being in that audience and seeing that? Oh my, because the show never has those big sight gags like this. This isn't Live Up Lucy where the bread's coming out of the oven and it's 20 feet long. Like we don't usually see that kind of thing. So to see it, I think the laughter that audience had is like just an indication of how effective it was. It just really took them to a place that they'd never been before on this show.
Fantastic. They'd never seen anything like that.
The laugh went on forever, and I'm sure that we might have cut part of the laugh, because the people at home stopped laughing much earlier than people in the studio where it's a party time. So you just cut away to Mary on the floor, and you can cut some of the footage out.
Carl and Dick talked about, the volume of walnuts. But the other thing that the cast remembers with great detail is the fact that they ate walnuts all week during this filming of this episode, with some unintended consequences.
Unfortunately, there were walnuts in huge croaker sacks all over the place. And so we'd all walk around all day eating these walnuts, which were delicious, but they have a tendency to kind of stop you up, bind you up a little bit. Everybody had the problem during the week, every one of us. I bet we ate about a sack full. God, they were good.
And I think we were eating walnuts all during the show.
And we were eating walnuts all day. A lot of people got constipated, cracking walnuts and eating them. They were delicious.
So this 1,800 walnuts, I was reading, I think it was in your book, David, that they basically, the ones that weren't broken, they had a pact with the store of like, well, we can return the ones that aren't broken or messed up, and they'll give us our money back, which is so interesting.
So that's true. The unused walnuts, the undamaged ones, were returned to the wholesaler, or somehow they got a credit, and then those walnuts ended up truly in the Los Angeles supermarket. So people were going and buying walnuts that had actually been used on the show.
I also heard that Rosemary had a bunch of walnut trees. Is that true? And she had kind of offered to give them, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, she had walnut trees on her property. She kind of kiddingly said, if you need the walnuts, I got the walnut trees. And they said, no, I think we got it, but thank you for the offer. Well, at this point, Laura is up on her feet, and Rob asks Laura to wake him up because he's having a nightmare. And he says, hit me. And she says, well, I'll hit you, but I won't do much good. So she hits him, but that doesn't bring back his thumbs. This is a great line that Dick delivers, but he actually flubs, because Rob says, you have to help me get my thumb backs instead of my thumbs back.
I heard that too. This is the first time I've heard that on this watch, but I did hear it. Yeah.
Even though there was an error in the delivery, or I think the scene was just going and they figured, just let it go.
Well, and it makes sense in that moment. He might be flustered and say something incorrectly.
But you have to help me get my thumb backs. Go and listen to that. The excitement of the moment, the closet, her coming out, it all worked so beautifully. They just let the scene roll from that point.
Oh, yeah. Let it fly. So Laura at one point in this conversation says, oh, feeling a little out of breath. And she goes to pick up a water pitcher and takes a big drink. She's going to get a drink of fresh air, she says. So we're finally realizing, Laura's a Twiloite. If she wasn't before, she might be. And then she kind of goes on to prove it with the next few moments to him. So for the first part, she's got her back to him as she's drinking the water, and she puts it down and she says, oh, look, got a stain on your necktie. And of course, and her, by the way, her accent is slowly getting like more and more British as the scene goes on to kind of indicate too, which I thought was clever.
And Rob sort of looks at her and is pointing, and he says, I know Kolek told me, how do you know? To which she says, don't you know it's impolite to point? You could see the look on his face like, oh my gosh. She proceeds to identify herself as Lolak of Twilo, and sort of, I would say, glares at him with the back of her head and says, I see you.
And she opens her hair up to her extra eyes to look at him, and Rob's reaction there is like amazing.
The one that Mary and I had fun with is when I come home from work and I realize she's got eyes in the back of her head. And I'm spooked by that. And I'm saying, don't do that.
And he tries to approach, almost going to touch her. And she says, my eyes, don't touch my eyes. Again, these are the lines that we thought Danny Thomas was going to have earlier, but whatever reason, maybe they decided to delay them for more effect here from Lolak.
His reaction's great. His face is just in horror as he's seeing this, extra set of eyes.
Yeah, he declares he's got to get out of the nightmare and starts running around the living room, only to discover now that all of the Twilights have invaded the house.
We got Buddy coming in from the den, and Sally's coming in from the hallway. All the entrances of the house, they're all filtering into the living room. Mel, Danny Thomas, everybody.
So I had asked Rosemarie, where were you when Laura came out of the closet? And she said, well, I was back down that hallway. I said, could you see it? And she said, no, we couldn't see it. But she said, we knew when it happened because of the reaction.
Can you imagine? Just hearing that crowd just roar like that.
They basically surround him. He cowers down on the floor. Interestingly, when they come out, all of them have their hands postured in such a way that their thumbs are all gone since they're all Twilight.
Yep.
The music, again, is churning. And with that, we hear the sound of an alarm clock ringing.
And it brings us back to reality, to the bedroom where Laura and Rob were going to bed earlier that night and are in bed. And the alarm clock's going off because Laura had it set for an hour, just in case so she could be saved by the bell from Kolek. And Rob and Laura are they're screaming, they're tossing in their sleep, the blankets are flying. I mean, it's hilarious. It's like such a great little bit of physical comedy. They're so funny. And they're trying to turn off the alarm clock and turn on the light, trying to figure out what happened. And there's kind of a very sweet, intimate moment where they're both on the floor between the beds because they've both fallen off. And they're very kind of vulnerable and sharing their nightmares with each other and look, this happened to me and this is what I had. And it's really sweet chemistry. It's so adorable.
Rob says, I dreamed that I was a Twilight and I lost my sense of humor in my thumbs. And he looks down and he sees them and sort of, doesn't he kiss his thumbs?
Yeah, he kisses them.
Laura says, well, I dreamt Danny Thomas was chasing me, throwing walnuts, and every place he'd hit me, I'd lose a thumb and grow an eye.
Her grow an eye, the way she delivers that, grow an eye. She can't even say it. It's so funny. So they're too scared to go to sleep. And I think Laura even says, do you wish it was morning? I wish it was morning. They're almost like two scared kids,
Rob suggests, well, we could twiddle our thumbs. Again, some more missing lines that didn't make it to the final. Rob suggests that we could twiddle their thumbs. And he says, hey, that's not a bad idea. That way we can keep an eye on them. Laura says, yeah. So they both start twiddling their thumbs. And Laura says,
funny.
I've never done this with anyone else before. And Rob looks at her and says, well, I hope not. It's some intimate thing.
Oh, how funny, because I was just kind of mentioning that about the kind of intimate. That's so interesting.
So Laura looks down at the thumbs and says, aren't they beautiful?
So then it kind of, there's I guess a commercial break, I suppose, kind of comes back. And they're in the bedroom. It's just a short time later. It's dark. You can tell they've been trying to sleep. The lights are off. They're laying in bed. But of course, neither of them is asleep. They're both wide awake, eyes open, laying on their back. I can't sleep either. Rob says, well, we can watch TV. And the audience laughs here at this point. Did you notice this? The audience has this great laugh because they're anticipating oh no, you were trying to consult this TV for comfort but it's going to be the very thing that led you to the nightmare in the first place. Stop, so you can hear the audience oh no, kind of give this. It's so fantastic.
In his search for insomnia theater, he stumbles upon an exercise program, which the voiceover for the exercise instructor is Jerry Paris doing the voiceover. So that's kind of fun.
Yes.
They think, well, we're not going to do exercising this time of night. So they switch to another program.
Who's the handsome man with the interesting beard or with the beard or something?
And we hear Reiner's voice. Can you believe that this man is 200,000 bumblebees?
And then Laura's reaction, like, oh, like, get it off. It's just like, oh my God. And Rob quick, turns it to a different channel. And then, of course, then they think, oh, okay, here we found it, a movie that we can watch. They say, hey, this is going to, this movie, Road to Singapore.
Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. Yeah, it's tomorrow night. It's not tonight.
Now is the werewolf from outer space.
They quickly turn the channel back to the initial channel of the exercise routine. And we close the episode with them doing unison leg exercises in their beds to finish the episode.
It's such a unique episode. It takes us into just a land we've never known with this show, with just a whole situation that we've never seen before. We've seen dreams and things like that, but this is another level. We've never seen that. And it's fantastic. It's such a great nod to those old Twilight Zone and old monster movies and stuff. It's just everything about this episode is just such a really, really unique, special episode.
We mentioned at the top of the episode how Sheldon Leonard was disenchanted with this whole idea and didn't think how it would work. But after the episode aired, apparently Sheldon felt a little bit differently about it all.
And the one thing that I think made Sheldon Leonard such a big man, in my eyes anyway, in front of everybody, he said, this is one of the best shows I've ever seen. I made a mistake. I was wrong. You people are just wonderful.
When the show came out, it got wonderful response from the audience. We got a lot of letters. And Sheldon Leonard that week had been interviewed on the LA Times. And in it, he said, I saw this show and I didn't think it was going to work. You see how wrong I can be? That was a big man.
Sheldon was quite a guy. I had the chance to interview him once, and he was just a great guy. Carl shared with me that he also got some feedback from a gentleman named Saul Bass, who was a main title designer for feature films. And Carl got a package in the mail and he opened it up, and it was a walnut with a little top and a bottom with a hinge. And Carl said, I opened the top of the walnut, and when I opened it, this little orange hand came up, very, very small inside of this walnut, no thumb. And there was a little writing on the hand that basically Saul Bass said, what a great episode. And
cool.
Carl saved that for the rest of his life, and now is part of the collection of Carl Reiner's archives at the National Comedy Center in Jamestown, New York. And I'm not sure if it's on display at this point, but I suspect at some point in time it'll rotate and circulate.
That is really cool.
What a fun piece of feedback to have. Yeah. I also had the opportunity to ask Dick and Carl and Rosemary at one point just to reminisce and recollect about what they remembered about the Walnut episode. And here's how each of them responded.
I think probably it's the best remembered of all our shows because it was such fun to do.
The Walnut episode was one of the funniest and best we've ever done. And it took the audience a while to get used to that it was different, but it was fun to do.
The Walnut episode was memorable for me because it took us away from the ordinary regular show that we did. It took us into a land that we didn't know about, and to kind of behavior that we didn't do. When you do a dream sequence, you can do anything. It's always a pleasure to let your mind go.
I agree with Rosemary. It really took us to a place we'd never been, and it was so kind of whimsical. It was creepy, but it was also really fun. You knew nothing terrible was going to happen. It's a nightmare, but like Rob's going to wake up. Everything's going to be okay. So you can really get into the kind of grotesqueness of the eyes and all that. Like you can really kind of fall into it because well, in the end, it's all going to be all right. So it's okay.
It's interesting. Many fans love the episode. There's a slice of fans, though, that don't like it.
I think I wrote here on my notes, divisive.
But those that love it and know those lines and know those scenes and can recite them off the top of the head.
Yeah. I tend to think that the most creative, unique, and kind of genius episodes are the ones that are divisive because you either get it or you're not into it.
Yeah.
And it's one or the other. And I think that says something about the writing, Carl's writing.
As I said at the top, the genius writing, just the whole concept of putting it together, and he just kept extending the thoughts. Everything became walnut related, and the cliches of, take two of these and a glass of air, and that sort of thing.
And then, of course, that amazing closet sight gag that was just like, just a really, like I said, a pinnacle of the series, in my opinion. I mean, you can't think of that show without thinking of that shot of her, coming down those walnuts. And it's just like, to work that into such a bizarre kind of storyline too. It's phenomenal.
This episode did get a tip of the hat in a couple of other programs, which we'll just mention briefly. And that is in the later 60s, Dick teamed back up with Mary on Dick Van Dyke and the Other Woman. Near the end of that program, they sort of took a revisit to the Dick Van Dyke Show set in the living room, and Rob was in the living room and went back and opened the closet door, and all came those pile of walnuts again. No Mary Tyler Moore on them this time. Many, many years later, when Dick was serving in his role as the chairman of Nick at Night, they did a program called The Chairman's Choice, where Dick selected his top episodes, and among them was the Walnut episode.
I love that he appreciates it too. That's cool.
He went over and he opened this side door, and again, out came this pile of walnuts. And I had read somewhere, or someone told me that they were going to try not to have Mary come out this time, but to have Maury come sliding down the pile of walnuts. And for whatever reason, I don't know if they ended up shooting in New York and Maury wasn't there, or Maury couldn't do it in LA, but they just let the walnuts pour out.
That has such an image I can't get out of my head now.
You can probably find that clip out on YouTube somewhere.
Absolutely.
We have hoped that you've enjoyed this detailed review of the classic It May Look Like a Walnut episode. I know that I certainly have.
It was a joy. If you'd like to be notified when new episodes like this are released, just feel free to subscribe to our Tripping Over the Ottoman channel on YouTube. Our podcast is also available on all the major streaming platforms. You can find us there too.
And just a reminder that we are a community, so we value your comments, questions, and your contributions to the discussions surrounding our show. So please feel free to leave some feedback on that YouTube channel or send an email to trippingovertheottoman@gmail.com. Say with the subject of Box 7030. We'd love to get your emails and see your feedback and hear what you have to say. As we finish this particular podcast, I have a specific piece of advice, and that is to make sure that all of you remember to keep your sense of humor and your thumbs up. So for today, I am David.
And I'm Abby, and thanks for tripping over the Ottoman with us. We'll see you next time.